A few years ago, I made a video compiling what I personally believe to be the ugliest monster trucks of all time. Some aged better than others, but one thing I, nor anyone in the monster truck community hasn't talked about is what runs under the fiberglass. The chassis of a monster truck is just as important as the wheel it runs on. Chassis are all unique in their own ways, just like the skin they run with. But there's some chassis that did not have aesthetics on the mind of the fabricators, but to be fair, there's almost no reason to since they're almost always fully clothed. Unless your jester who loves to strip naked every other weekend.
Oh, this is one fine day to be nude.
So let's see the trucks that are beautiful on the outside but utterly disgusting on the inside.
Number 10.
Kicking off this list, we have the 12th Gravedigger chassis built in 1996. This chassis stands out from all the other Gravediggers as this chassis has the longest wheelbase of all Gravedigger chassis before and since, not counting the ride trucks. However, in return, the chassis made the body look very small because the truck was so long, especially with earlier Gravediggers. I guess this is what happens when you give a truck Viagra.
Number 9.
Sticking with Gravedigger, we have the second version of the 7th Gravedigger, more specifically the rebuild starting around the start of the millennium. However, this would be a curse, as Gravedigger 7 would be notorious for mechanical problems. As Monster Talk put it,
was basically the equivalent of an RC Gravedigger that was ordered from Wish.com.
Despite that, Dennis would win his first and only freestyle championship with this chassis. And now with the history out of the way, let's roast this truck. This chassis looks like a reverse Gravedigger 12 as the axles look squished together.
Number 8.
At number 8, we have the first ever War Wizard. The truck itself looks like a lowrider and the wheels look huge compared to the overall compacted chassis. In 2006, of course, this would be the worst season for Randy Moore as he would famously trash the truck in Atlanta.
Taking a picture of the War Wizard. What an awesome looking machine. He comes out strong.
For the rest of the year, he would run on the Total Chaos chassis.
Number 7.
At number 7, we have historically my least favorite truck, appearance-wise, Wildflower. This chassis is somewhat a Gravedigger 12 with the exaggerated length of the wheelbase, and this made even weirder by the fact that the body is only covering half the chassis, not to mention the shocks protruding over the chassis itself, let alone the body.
Number 6.
Number 6 takes us to Perrin Motorsports, the only entry in this video to be a team as a whole, pretty much, because all of their trucks use the 1941 Willys style, which I'm normally okay with, but they just look very awkward on the chassis. Some trucks look better than others, but the winner in this video is Little Miss Dangerous. The slight greenish-yellow chassis does not match up with the yellow on the main body. Though I'm not a big fan of high maintenance, it's a vast improvement from the first iteration.
Number 5.
At number 5, we have the very first Brutus chassis. This is the definition of building a chassis on a budget. I don't think you can make a chassis any skinnier. I'd be scared to suffer concussion from just turning my head, not to mention the console joystick. What is Chris thinking? He's playing rigs of rods on an Atari controller for a steering wheel?
Number 4.
Number 4 gives us a Gravedigger 7 type chassis, except even more compressed. Not to mention the engine is placed in the front, so this should have been Max D7 instead of California Kid, or now as we call it, the Cali Kid because reasons. There are other trucks just like this, like Rockstar, but they're few and far in between. This looks like a mini truck they put on normal-sized wheels.
Number 3.
At number 3, we go to the very first Iron Warrior. The main reason for making this list is not the body looking too small or the height of the chassis looks too tall, but the fact that the shocks are stuck vertically on the back of the tailgate, thus defeating the whole purpose of the shocks if they're not going to connect to the axle. To be fair, the chassis was inherited from Glenn Bolin. In 2008, Mike Vaughters would make a much more traditional chassis. Unfortunately, the original chassis is just a stripped roll cage laying out somewhere in the middle of Hagerstown, Maryland, probably.
Number 2.
Number 2 is the chassis that refused to die. Cyborg was basically a 15-year-old laptop running Windows 10. Jack Coburn squoze every last taste of this already bland lemon of a truck, which isn't saying much since the truck still sucked. This is peak run it to the ground, and the chassis never looked good, even looked outdated for even back then. I guess it was on brand as the front axle looked robotic in a way. In 2012, the truck was shelved as the chassis was rebuilt just like Gravedigger 7. However, just like Gravedigger 7, it didn't do very well. However, the truck's comeback was short-lived, as it hasn't run since 2017. Before getting to number 1, here are some honorable mentions.
Number 1.
Yes, the oldest running gag on this channel. Project X is the ugliest, primarily because the chassis is the body itself. There have been other bodiless monster trucks, but this is the worst looking one ever. This looks like a Max D chassis if the designer was schizophrenic and on an acid trip, an LSD trip, trying to draw a croissant or something like that. Not to mention the truck was originally green.
Green!
So Project X sweeps across the board once again. But now I pass the question on to you. What is the ugliest monster truck chassis you've ever seen? Leave your comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you on the flip side.